I'm Andrew Friedman, Senior Climate Reporter with Axios. If you joined us for our previous receptions, thank you, welcome back. If this is your first time here at Axios House, thank you for coming. This is our first series of events at COP, and we're really excited to be here. I'm very excited about the lineup tonight to discuss ways to advance the global green workforce and a ton of other things. So first, I'm honored to introduce our first guest, former US Vice President Al Gore.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Andrew, and thank you for your voluminous and expert coverage of all that's going on here. Not easy.
I try. So
hey,
let's get right to it. You've been outspoken about the conflicts of interest inherent with the COP president for months, even calling for him to step down earlier. How much of his statements here have detracted from the main issues at hand?
Well, I don't want to criticize him personally. I've known him for years. He's a very nice person to me and a very smart person, obviously. I just think that it's disrespectful of the world public to undermine the trust that people ought to be able to have in the integrity of this process. And the idea that the person in charge of organizing this entire exercise in a way that assists the global community in safeguarding humanity's future by reducing the spewing of all this heat-trapping gas into the sky would be the same person who is assiduously preparing one of the most aggressive expansions of more and more fossil fuel production, timed according to the advice of their PR firm to begin immediately when the final gavel is banged at the close of the COP. I find that abusive of the public trust. And again, it's not criticism of him personally. It is a continuation of a trend that has seen the fossil fuel industry with its consulting firms and, McKinsey and BCG and law firms, DLA Piper and all of the, Edelman and the PR groups. And it's a very powerful set of tools for any enterprise to use in managing a process that ought to be aimed at protecting our future, but instead has been aimed at setting the stage for another round of aggressive expansion of fossil fuels. And we're past that. I mean, we're out of time, And they talk about this abatement, and as I've said, the industry's way more skilled at capturing politicians than capturing emissions, and the policy capture process has now extended to the COP process, and the number of fossil fuel delegates has risen steadily with each COP. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. Bear with me just for a second. A few years ago, our then mayor had a plan to try to cut down on traffic and the use of individual vehicles by boosting mass transit and electric buses and so forth. And the fossil fuel companies came in and spent 4 times as much money as the advocates of this transportation reform under the radar with misleading advertisements and AstroTurf organizing to kill the plan so that there would not be a single gallon of fuel reduced in consumption. And the fact that happened in the city where I live is not such a big deal, but it's a window into what happens in every city. in every location that I'm aware of, local, county, state, provincial, regional, national, and international at the COP, anything that holds out the prospect of reducing the consumption of a single barrel of oil, a single MCF of gas, a single ton of coal, they're in there fighting with their fixers and their lawyers and their PR people and their revolving door colleagues and their money, and to block progress. All the talk about phasing out fossil fuels, which I think is the single test of success or failure here. Of course, yesterday, Abdulaziz bin Salman did an interview in Riyadh on television, and he was asked not about phase out, but about phase down. Would you accept phase down? Absolutely not, he said. And of course, we need reform of the COP process, because under the current setup, we have to beg petrostates for their permission to save the future of humanity. And I feel that is an unacceptable state of affairs, because I have grandchildren. And that's just a way of saying, because I, like most people, care about the future of the human race. And we are in way more danger right now than most people realize. There are 1.5 million people today out of their homes in East Africa because of another rain bomb, typical of what the climate crisis is doing. In this city of Dubai this summer, the feels like temperatures were between 40 and 60 degrees, in keeping with the scientific predictions that the combination of heat and lethal humidity will make much larger areas of our Earth physiologically unlivable for human beings. Do we care about that? Or is it yet another occasion to go along, to get along, and not be careful not to offend anyone? Because the petrostates really are focused on, well, we saw another leak this week from CCR, which is a great investigative reporting group in league with Channel 4. I mean, you're the best, Andrew. Don't get me wrong, but
thank you.
But,
I was off that day.
But leaking this incredibly offensive, vast plan to artificially boost the consumption of fossil fuels, and they're always saying, "Oh well, there's so much demand, we have to meet the demand." Yeah, sure. And they're themselves trying to artificially boost the demand, their own words, because of the concerns about climate crisis could potentially reduce the demand of fossil fuels, and in their view, God forbid. And so they're boosting it. And the other way they boost it is, as I said before, blocking any measures that are designed to reduce it. Look, I've been doing this for so long, I press my own buttons now, so go ahead. You have another question?
I do. Well, I have.
Thank you for the standing ovation and back. I appreciate that.
I have two questions in response to that. One is these countries, the COP president and others, have been arguing for managing the decline of fossil fuels, or just continuing to expand, using words like unabated, putting that in agreements. So you've been arguing against slowing the transition, anything that slows the transition to renewables. How fast are you for that transition to happen? Because if we go too quickly, this disappears, and much of the world that relies on fossil fuels,
This being
Dubai, this being what powers this country, this being part of what powers the United States, which arguably is a petrostate.
So you're saying we might have to go back to the caves?
I'm not saying I agree that we're going back to the caves. I'm saying.
Do you know about the Stockholm Syndrome, Andrew?
Yes. I'm saying, what are you for, given how effectively you're arguing against the COP leadership and these countries that are putting these positions forward?
Let me tell you what puts this place at risk. What puts this place at risk is continuing to spew 162 million tons of heat-trapping pollution into the thin shell of atmosphere that surrounds the planet every single day. The accumulated amount today trapped as much extra heat in the Earth system as would be released by 750,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding on the Earth today, every day. That's what's causing the evaporation of all this water vapor, disrupting the Earth's water cycle, causing the rain bombs, causing the droughts. It was 62 degrees in part of China this July. The Lancet Commission has predicted 1 billion climate refugees crossing international borders in the next 6 decades. And the out-migration starts in places just like this. That's what puts this place at risk. And you started your question with a reference to abatement, unabated. Let's be clear about this. The Secretary General began this conference with a very clear and very powerful statement. I would encourage everyone to listen very carefully to Antonio Guterres' words. Abatement is yet another bright, shiny object to distract our attention from job number one. Why do I say that? Is there no chance of a miraculous breakthrough that makes carbon capture and sequestration feasible? Well, of course there's a chance. Sure, we've had some technological surprises, but by now in the technological revolution, we have a lot of experience in understanding what the Wright's Law cost down curves are and what they're not, and what are the signs of a rapid reduction and what are not. Oxford University's done a couple of studies. The second one was released yesterday. Earlier, they released a study of all of the technology revolutions that produce these Wright's Law cost down curves. Some of them are very rapid, like computer chips. Moore's Law is a Wright's curve, of course. Flat screen TVs, mobile phones, and we kind of get used to the fact that new technologies might, just as a matter of course, come down in cost dramatically, even as they improve miraculously, and some of them do. So Oxford did a full-up study, and they had the ones that come down fast, the ones that come down a little bit slower. There's a small category called non-improving technologies. That's where carbon capture and sequestration belongs, where they put it. It has been used for 50 years, and there has been zero decline in cost in any part of the process. What that means is that anyone who tries to be credible in holding out the expectation that it will come down in cost dramatically is deceiving, is trying to deceive us. Again, a lot of things are possible, but it is extremely unlikely. Here's a test. We ran an experiment on this in the United States when the EPA told the coal-burning utility industry, you have to shut down the burning of coal for electricity unless you use carbon capture and sequestration. And we'll subsidize it. Of course, we'll force the taxpayers to subsidize it. But if you use CCS, you can keep burning coal. Oh, Mitch McConnell led the outrage, and the entire coal industry said, carbon capture and sequestration, are you kidding? That doesn't work. It's not feasible. It's technologically and financially unusable, okay? So if you're the head of a utility and you want to use CCS, you have to take 1/3 of the electricity you're selling to your customers and use it to run the process. So where's the extra electricity, extra energy going to come from? Burning more fossil fuels or from renewables? And if the latter, why not just use the renewables to replace the stuff that's putting that crap up into the sky in the first place? And direct air capture, that's a really hilarious technology. And again, it is always possible that there will be a break. And I support robust research, really and truly. We got to throw everything we've got at this crisis. The future of our species depends upon it. Future of our civilization, first of all, depends upon it. So yeah, I support research. But there is a big difference between a research program and a deceptive lie to publics around the world that this is ready to go, and what it means is we can keep burning fossil fuels forever. Isn't it obvious what's happening? Do they take us for fools? Alden says yes. Alden is the authority on these things, so on most things related to climate, by the way. But I just think that it's too late in the game to tolerate this outright deception. And so, as the Secretary General says, we need to phase out fossil fuels as quickly as possible, not kid around and lie to people about the availability of a feasible abatement strategy now, not go with this language of phase down over a long extended period of time and pretend that it may come quicker than it will if we don't force them to somehow. We need to phase out fossil fuels. And I think that publics around the world are connecting the dots. Mother Nature is a far more persuasive advocate than me or Alden or any of us here. And people are understanding what's going on now, I think, to more and more and more. And even people who don't like the word climate as part of their vocabularies are finding their own ways to say, something's going on here. We need to respond.
Yeah. One of the most difficult aspects of climate diplomacy and the COP process is a COP agreement, really any type of agreement there, must be adopted with the consensus of every country.
Yeah.
On the one hand, that's genius, since it gives small island nations the same vote, theoretically, as Saudi Arabia or the United States. We both know that that's not exactly how that happens.
Did I hear the word genius?
I think it's the one forum where that is the case. So we don't have another place where that exists.
Oh,
exactly.
The Senate filibuster, do you think that's
Yeah.
genius?
There have been a lot of really great military promotions lately. Are you thinking of trying to push for a change in the voting rules of COP?
Yeah.
And with which countries would you be seeking to work on that? To change it perhaps to 2/3 of a majority, or something else that you think would improve the workability of getting something through?
Well, again, I'm for pushing on every possibility that may change this game. And yes, I'm in favor of reforming the COP process. You can't really do it within the confines of the individual COP rules. You have to go back to the original authorizing treaty. I was in Rio, and Alden was there as well. A few others here probably, and took 3 years to organize COP1 in 1995 in Berlin, and the president of COP1, as I'm sure you know very well, Andrew, was the charismatic young environment minister of Germany, Angela Merkel. And first order of business was to adopt the rules for voting. So she proposed it. Saudi Arabia said, I object. And the coal industry in the U.S., at that time, the legendary Dark Lord of lobbying, Don Perlman, working hand in glove with Saudi Arabia, a couple of the other petrostates, blocked the adoption of the rules. And that's why we have this default procedure relying on consensus. And consensus differs from unanimity in the eye of the president of the COP. And there have been times in these COPs where Vanuatu or another especially vulnerable nation has objecting in the back of the room, oh, I don't see anybody, and bang the gavel, and everybody, oh, well, you can't make it work unless you have a president COP who's willing to, yeah. But if Saudi Arabia is objecting, they don't ignore that. And if a petrostate is in charge of the process, they especially don't ignore that. They wire it in advance. Now, I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised by the end of this COP. I'm hoping there is enough outrage around the world at the obscene structure of this decision-making process with the reported use of the preparatory meetings to sell more oil and gas, with the ongoing artificial increase in demand, the other things that have, with the denial of climate science under pressure. And by the way, do not ever try to mansplain to Mary Robinson. It doesn't work.
He called her ma'am twice.
That was in the sentence where he said, I am the man. In charge?
Yes.
I am the man in charge.
Yes.
Yes.
That was
and
a really
it was a gender equity event, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I thought so, yeah.
Let's move on to a little bit more of a green jobs question. What gives you hope?
The way to get lean jobs is on LinkedIn, by the way, the sponsor of this event. I'm serious. Go ahead. I need to sing for my dinner here.
No, I have many friends who are disillusioned where they work, and they're leaving and coming into companies that are trying to tackle climate change.
Yeah.
Is that something, among other things, that give you particular hope about climate change going forward, rather than just focusing on the COP
Yes,
process?
it is. Yes, it is. Very much so. And the Oxford Policy Review, which includes Joe Stiglitz, my favorite economist, I think he's the smartest in the profession, they did a full-up review that showed, among other things, that investing in the green technologies create almost 3x, almost 3 times, I think it's 2.9 times as many jobs per dollar as investing in the old dirty, poisonous, polluting fossil energies. And so it's good for green jobs to steer investments into this transition. It's good for damn near everything. Cleans up the air. By the way, have you been breathing the air here? Today it was 12x higher than the WHO minimum standards for healthy air. 3 days ago it was 14x. Yesterday it was 11x. 8.7 million people are killed every year by the particulate pollution that is co-produced with the combustion of fossil fuels that creates the greenhouse gases.
I asked a hopeful question.
Yeah. Well, I'm giving you the reasons why you ought to reach out for the hope. Yes, I'm very much in support of that, and it's hopeful as encouragement for people to do it. Absolutely. And I was going to steer it toward a specific example. In my part of the United States, the southeastern United States, there are so many jobs being created by the IRA in new EV plants and battery plants. I went to an event for EVs. A conservative Republican MAGA congressman from the coastal district of Georgia was standing up praising the EV industry because they're putting jobs in his district. And that's happening all over the United States, but especially in a lot of the red states, not necessarily by political design, I'm sure not so, but it's hopeful in a lot of ways, Andrew. And when you talk about young people wanting to go into these, anybody here who's hiring, who has a responsibility in HR to recruit or retain, you already know these young people, they're interviewing you when you interview them. And They want to make good money, of course, but they want to feel like their jobs give them a chance to be a part of something larger than simply making money. And that in itself is a really hopeful trend.
We had the good fortune last night of hearing from one of your colleagues, Gavin McCormick, who described you as a total AI nerd going back many years. Would you say that that's true, and can you describe the ways you think AI is transforming climate science and policy already, such as through Climate Trace, which is the organization you're involved in?
Thank you. Thank you for asking the question. AI is the single most important and impactful technology that humanity's ever created, in my opinion. And we are just in the early stages of an AI-driven technology revolution that really has almost no limit. It's quite extraordinary. Gavin McCormick is one of my partners in this Climate Trace Coalition. There are 12 organizations and more than 100 other contributing organizations, and it's a joy working with Gavin. He's terrific. 28 years ago, when I was in the VP gig, I went out and made a long set piece at the Museum of Science in Los Angeles to propose a program called Digital Earth. And even though AI did not exist then, to my knowledge, and folks like Jeffrey Hinton already knew about it maybe, I did not, but I called for research into technologies that would make it possible to fuse together multiple data streams in order to help solve the climate crisis. I also called for, as part of Digital Earth, a specific project to make it possible to hover in orbit among any point on the Earth's surface and then descend through successively denser data sets to hover just a few meters above any part of the Earth. And Dan Golden, who was at that time the administrator of NASA, Bill Nelson's been here this week, you may know, he agreed to start that program. We got the funding in the Congress. They gave a contract for that part of it to a company called Keyhole. And in 2003, Google bought Keyhole, and that became Google Earth. That's where Google Earth came from. The fusing of data from multiple data streams for climate, that has only been possible fairly recently. And it is an incredible new capacity. By the way, the reason you have to use AI to measure point source emission sites of CO2 is that you're looking down from the satellite through a column of air that's so enriched with CO2 that the signal to noise ratio defies your purpose, and your target of observation is usually adjacent to some other CO2 emitting sites or a highway that has a lot of CO2. You can see methane directly from space, measure it directly, and we do that as well. Also nitrous oxides, also the F gases, every greenhouse gas. And we released our third inventory 3 days ago, the largest 352 million point source emitting sites of GHG pollution, essentially all of the significant ones, and including concentrated animal feeding lots, rice paddies, you name it, and of course all the industrial sources. And every single one of those 350 million sites has metadata where you can, who owns it, what the capacity is. A lot of large companies, Tesla, General Motors, Polestar, Boeing, a bunch of others, are using the site to figure out how to rework their supply chains to sub out high emitting sources for low emitting sources. If you can get the same tonnage of the same quality steel from an electric arc furnace as compared to a blast furnace, you're going to reduce your Scope 3 emissions, Scope 2 emissions dramatically, and Scope 3. It applies across the board, and at no cost, really, and you can save money. And we can also tell them how much capacity headroom there is in these facilities so that when they go to bargain for swapping out their supply chains, they can do it more easily.
What do you think that's going to some of the things that could lead to policy-wise. Because to me, it lends itself to sort of a name and shame type regime, which you can do under the Paris Agreement. It's not a mandatory agreement exactly. Or it could potentially pave the way for something mandatory in the future, either nationally, subnationally, or internationally. The information that you guys are democratizing would seem to be something that policymakers, including some policy staffers who I know are here, would be interested in it.
Yeah, I think so. And just to loop back to a question you asked earlier about young people figuring out what company to work for, I fully expect they're going to be using Climate Trace to figure out what the emissions are. If they're going to go into a specific industry, it's easy for them to compare who's got the high emissions, who's got the low emission. Investors who have pledged to have net zero portfolios will use it. NGOs can use it for prioritizing their campaigning activities. And corporates who are sincerely interested in reducing their emissions and have trouble figuring out how much they're taking on board with different suppliers, this is a huge advantage. It doesn't have to be naming and shaming. It can be, I can't think of an alliterative or rhyming way to put a positive spin on it, but it can be looking for the best opportunities to help save the planet.
I just find it really strange right now that there's a party boat blasting music. It's like a very COP28 vibe. With it's just a mixing of.
I think it's kind of great things. Background music.
Yeah, exactly.
It's working for me, man.
What would you say to young people in the U.S. who are either not passionate about or disillusioned with the Biden administration's approach to climate change, maybe turned off by politics in general, and what the planetary stakes are in the race?
Well, I'd say that the specific gravity of his accomplishment in passing the IRA outweighs anything and everything beyond that. I'm not happy with some of the leasing of public lands, and I get it. But I think the presidency is a team sport, and he's put together maybe the best team, one of the best teams ever in the executive branch, and I'm all for him, and I think that he has done a terrific job. I do think that they're recalibrating some of the leasing approaches, some of the LNG approaches, and I hope that rethinking and recalibrating will continue. But the IRA is incredible. The latest estimates I've seen are that it's going to allocate around $1.2 trillion to green energy, the sustainability transition, and I think he's terrific, and I'm going to do my best to support him.
Do you think when you go out and you talk to the business community, you talk to others, you train people with the Climate Reality Project, do you think the message is getting out about what the IRA is? Because we run, the wonderful, fun thing of focus groups in swing states, and I talk to, watch voters who maybe went from Trump to Biden and see where they might go this time. And they can usually name one thing that the president is doing on climate, and that's EVs. Some of it's solar, but nobody knows what the heck the IRA is. I don't know if it's just a messaging challenge that you see, but it's something that people in Washington are acutely aware of right now and anxious about whether or not people will see the benefits in their communities, especially if a lot of red states, which might stay red in a presidential election, are the ones seeing the benefits.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it, but I do know that that Republican MAGA congressman in Savannah, Georgia, has gotten a message. And the people who are working in that plant have gotten the message. And I know that people in Tennessee who have jobs now that they didn't have before have gotten that message. I don't think that average people really pay that much attention to, what some of us follow so carefully, the legislative agenda and what's passed and what hasn't. But I think the real world impact does get through to people. And it's often especially difficult to get an accurate reading on things like that a year in advance of the election. And probably better than I do, all of the presidents who've been this far down and more a year before the election. I think inflation has a long political tail, but inflation's coming down really fast, and it's not showing up in recalibrated political attitudes yet, but maybe it will a year from now. And where the awareness is also changing is in other countries. I've talked to folks from the European Union who use the phrase race to the top now. And some of the Asian countries, same thing. We're seeing other nations forced to react to what the IRA has done for business recruitment and jobs creation in the U.S., and I think that's a good thing. But it's always a challenge. I've been friends, I haven't seen him in a while, but an official in the European Union from Luxembourg, Claude Juncker, has said about all these policy choices, he said, we all know what to do. We just don't know how to get elected after we do it. And I think that's definitely a reality. And I think that Joe Biden, like anyone in elective office, has to balance a lot of stuff. It's a difficult job. He's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. And again, I think he's doing a good job, and I hope that he will be rewarded with re-election. But, it's...
Did you think it was odd that he didn't come here?
Well, he's got 2 wars that he's managing right now.
One's pretty close.
Yeah, that's another disadvantage,
right.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess, he did do a fly-in to Sharm last year. And I think, the emerging controversy over the strange organization of this COP may have discouraged them. I don't know. But to specifically answer your question, for whatever reason, I was not surprised. I think, again, the expectations for this COP were set pretty low when the CEO of one of the largest and by most measures least responsible oil companies was put in charge of it. I think that changed the expectations quite a bit.
Every time I talk with the COP28 leaders, I get the line about how they don't flare anymore in their operations.
Yeah.
And then I look out the window.
Then you look out the window, exactly. And when we launched the Climate Trace Inventory, we took the statements of ADNOC, Sultan's oil company, that they have completely eliminated methane emissions from the pipelines and the transport of oil and gas. Okay, well, we see them, here they are, and we put the pictures of the plumes and all of the emissions, and I don't know how you reconcile that. It's tempting to call it a falsehood. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's just a mistake of some sort. Maybe it was a mistake when they said that they managed 20 gigawatts of renewable energy and that Masdar is one of the greatest renewable energy companies in the world. No, it's 62nd in line, and it's not 20 gigawatts, it's 3 gigawatts. And again, maybe that's just a mistake. And, when he said he didn't say what he said to Mary Robinson, maybe that was a mistake. But the tape is pretty clear, you can hear it. So I'm a little puzzled by some of this.
How do you think the 2 leaks now, one being the conversation and one being the backroom deals arguably happening on COP28 business, How will they, do you think, change the public perception globally, especially on these countries that are counting on progress here for their very survival? How will it change the perception of whatever deal emerges, which we both, said back there, it's not like they're going to allow a phase out to be in there without a lot of weasel language or just not in there at all.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how this might tilt public perception, because you've never had a COP presidency caught in the acts that this one has been caught in.
Yeah. Red-handed, as Christiana Figueroa said. I don't know. I'm more focused on how it will change their perceptions in the next 10 days of what is possible and what they need to do to avoid COP28 in Dubai from forever being linked to the phrase catastrophic failure. I think putting as much pressure on them as possible, which is kind of what I've been trying to do.
I've noticed.
Pardon me?
I've noticed.
Yeah. Is maybe it won't work. Like you say, the die may be cast, but maybe it'll increase the odds that they will do something that's difficult for them to do. There's a really interesting experience that I've had while I've been here. And it has to do with the people who live here in Dubai, and not just, those who visit here or Europeans who live here, but the real residents, the citizens of Dubai. I can't tell you how many of them have come up to me and quietly said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I kind of think maybe the whistleblowers that have been putting this stuff out there may have a mindset similar to that. What I said earlier about the lethal humidity and the prospect that very soon now millions and even potentially billions of people will have to move from the places they've always called home is striking at a very deep level. And I think that the perception of countries around the world is also going to be driven by the fact that they're really worried about this now. I mean, you talk to people who know what the hell's going on, who live in India now, or Pakistan, or Indonesia, and the fact that the climate scientists have been spot on in what they've warned us in years past. All I've ever done, by the way, is simply channel what the scientists have said, and I've been a nudge prevailing on them to explain things to me patiently over and over and over again until I can get it in my head. It's simple enough language that I can communicate it. But the dominant reality is they've been right. Spectacularly right, tragically right. And that should lead us to pay more careful attention to what they're telling us is in prospect if we don't act. And I think that people in the tropics and subtropics, particularly around the world, and by the way, Canada hasn't had a great year either with the fires. My farm in Tennessee, we had smoke from the Canadian fires. You look at that little town of Lytton, I would have thought, you hear conversations these days, where should I move to be safe from the, have you had anybody had a conversation about that? Yeah, okay. I would have said maybe a couple of years ago, well, one place that's intriguing to me, let's go maybe 100 miles northeast of Vancouver in beautiful British Columbia. Maybe this little town of Lytton sounds like a beautiful destination. Until it reached 121 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the next day the entire town burned. No place is safe now. And that means that attitudes are changing in every place. I do not think we are far away from a positive political tipping point beyond which people are going to demand that policymakers in every country get their damn act together. We as human beings have a right to expect that those in a position of responsibility will once in a while free themselves from the hypnotic, enthralling trance of lobbyists who find various ways to get them in their pocket. We have a right to expect that every once in a while they'll free themselves from that and do what the hell the world needs to have done. And by the way, I came here not only because of my respect for you, Andrew, and Axios, but also to recruit you, really and truly. We need your help, those of you who are here. Many of you are already on side. Those of you who may not be, I'm here to recruit you. We need everyone. And if you doubt for a moment that we as human beings have the inherent capacity and the political will to rise to this challenge, remember that political will is itself a renewable resource. Abraham Lincoln said in darker days, the occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, we must think anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we will save our country. One final word, what is thrall? I'll tell you what it is. I researched it, which means I looked it up on Google. Thrall is an ancient Scandinavian institution of a form of voluntary slavery. Voluntary slavery. We have voluntarily allowed ourselves to be enslaved to a system that is based on digging, drilling, and pumping dead things from under the ground and combusting them in ways that destroy humanity's future. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we will save our civilization.
Well, on that note, we got to end here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining. Please stick
Thank you very
around
much.
To hear from more speakers. Thank you.
Hello, folks. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Boy, do I have a tough act to follow, but we've got a couple more speakers this evening, and then a full evening out here at the Axios House, our very first at a COP summit. I want to give a huge thanks to the Vice President for attending. Thanks to Andrew for that interview. Thanks to all of you for being here. This is Axios' very first visit to Dubai, very first visit to a COP summit, and an extra huge thanks to the folks at LinkedIn who helped make this possible. We couldn't do anything at Axios without the support of our partners, and so I'm very grateful to LinkedIn for making tonight happen. I want to welcome to the stage to join me for a View from the Top conversation, LinkedIn co-founder Alan Blue. Alan, you're up. All right, we got the big lead in. Let's see if we can hold that audience. What fascinated me about what the Vice President said, it was essentially a call to action.
Yes.
For people to join this movement, to join this green movement. Why I love talking to folks from LinkedIn is that when we have these conversations, you bring data. So let's talk about what the data shows as far as the green workforce, people moving into renewable, sustainable jobs versus oil and gas. What are the receipts of that conversation?
That's right. I mean, so basically the news is, right now, is good. We actually have a huge amount of hiring already happening today in the economy. So LinkedIn has an overall hiring rate. Hiring for renewables, for green jobs is actually 24% higher than all of those, outstripping all these other industries. So it's actually an amazing place to be.
Going back, do you see a similar fall in fossil fuel jobs? Remember, like, a huge point of like an issue we're facing here at COP is the phase out of that. What's the flip side of that coin?
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like a mirror image. Rise in renewable energy, rise in green and climate jobs, reduction in oil and gas jobs. But I will say, you've got to keep this in mind, the oil and gas industry still is about 5 times bigger than the renewable energy in terms of the total number of people employed. So there is a ways to go.
Can you trend that out a little bit? I mean, do you see the kind of growth needed in those renewable, sustainable jobs to catch up to oil and gas? And then looking into the future, remember, as the Vice President said, it's a ticking clock.
It is indeed. So we know that's growing, and we know, just listening to the conversations that are happening at COP right now, that we are only going to see continued growth across battery manufacture, across EVs, across recycling, across everything which has to do with green energy. That's all going to grow very quickly. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that the number of people who have those skills is actually not growing at the same rate. So if we look at the number of people who have skills right now, it's only 1 in 8 people in the world have a single green skill or experience. And actually that number goes down for women. One of the things which we have to watch out for here is equity. Like many industries at their beginning, the value is not evenly spread across all the people who might do it. So you look in developed economies, that's where most of the green skills are. But among women, it's lower. You look across developing economies, the green skills are much rarer, but the need is still there.
Right, and I think that's an important word, using skill versus education or credential as a framing, because so many of these jobs are so new. I think that's a framing that even COP is using. They're devoting a day to that. Unpack more of what you're learning about sort of what those skills are and why that's important to watch for.
Yeah, exactly. So we always try to talk about skills, especially when you're trying to build a big pool of people you can hire from. Because people can come from all different backgrounds and can get skills from all different sources. But if you're only looking for a degree, or you're only looking for previous experience, you're going to cut out at least 50% of the candidates you can consider. And that is extremely important if you're trying to stand up renewable energy generation in many parts of the world. You're going to have to turn over. You're going to have to look for people in places you would normally never look for them.
And is that because some of these are new jobs, right? The infrastructure around that hasn't been created to create perhaps credential or educate or apprentice them in similar way that you would have had for more traditional industry?
Absolutely. This is exactly what happened in Silicon Valley 25 years ago. Silicon Valley could not hire engineers, had to do extraordinary things to hire engineers. Same exact thing is happening with climate jobs right now.
So in the conversations you've been having around COP about this, are the right people here? Are they hearing this message? Are they understanding the step that they would need to take next?
So many of the right people are actually here at COP. So when we reach out to people, we talk to companies. They are represented here. They're the ones who actually do the hiring and write the paychecks, right? They're also the people who have to use the skill-based hiring. They're also the people who have to be willing to retrain their workforces. One of the things which is really important here, especially for industries which are in transition, is that your existing workforce has knowledge you need to be able to make that transition well, but you need to expend real resources making sure those employees can stay with you. That's number one. Number two is investors. Investors are here, but they need to understand that if they're going to de-risk their investments, they have to do so with some talent. And finally, governments. Governments, not only can they set the standards by which people invest in these skills, but they can also bring that equitable lens to making sure that the value for this gets to all people in the workforce, and not just the ones that, if you left to their own devices, would be automatically chosen.
Yeah, so let's check out those three. So, I mean, the companies have probably the greatest incentive because they require that to run their businesses. We've already seen massive moves by investments, by fund managers 100%. To prioritize that kind of investment. Governments perhaps don't move as quickly. Do you get a sense that policymakers are taking the steps? What are you telling them when they're asking, like, how can I foster this? How can I support this?
So this year at COP, we have heard more people talking about the need to think about workforce when thinking about the investments and the kinds of things that people
and
at
those are
COP
from government policymakers.
Everybody. So we hear it from companies, we hear it from government and from investors, we hear it from nonprofits, we hear it from philanthropies. Everybody is experiencing the problem. I talked to a woman the other night who basically said her philanthropy is interested in investing in green projects. But there are only a handful of people in the world who have the skills necessary to evaluate those green projects. And that's a real problem for them because every philanthropy is competing for that set.
Maybe let's try some specifics. I mean, probably what we're most familiar with is the job market and the policies in the United States. Are there things that the U.S. government has done correctly, has not done correctly? Are there lessons to learn, things to avoid from what's happened in America?
Well, it's so early to tell. Certainly the IRA has components which are about workforce training. However, the way in which we train skills in the United States is usually too little and too late. The thing is that the green transition has to happen now. It has to happen right away. And because of that, we need to make sure that the mechanisms by which we train people are listening to what the market needs now and doesn't wait 7 years for everything to go through the traditional methods by which we choose reskilling.
It comes a little bit into what we talk about a lot on the IRA is the implementation. Yes, there's a lot of money. Yes, there's a lot of incentivization of products, but you still need someone to build that windmill, to make that battery. And where do we create that workforce?
But I will say, absolutely, but I will say that the solution is actually different wherever you go in the world. So one of the things that we're doing here as LinkedIn is we're looking for people who are skilling all around the world. Because the resources that the United States has deployed over the last 50 to 100 years, and same is true in Europe, are quite unlike those that are available in some components of the world where there may not be existing skilling capabilities on the ground. This is one of the things where nonprofits and NGOs can actually fill the gap.
One of the, I think the key parts of what makes COP so interesting is that all of the above. It's not just policymakers, it's not just businesses, it's someone from each one of those types of organizations
100%.
going in the same direction. Well, we're not going to get quite as much time as the former vice president, so before I let you go, we'd like to end on one fun thing at Axios. We're changing it to a One Dubai thing. This is my first time, this is Axios' first time, this is not your first rodeo in Dubai, so for us newcomers, what's the thing we got to do before we go back to the airport?
Well, there's a lot to do in Dubai, but I'm going to recommend this walkway just out here. You see there's a causeway that goes out towards the Ferris wheel. You walk over a bridge, beautiful views of the skyline. You can get on the Ferris wheel if you like. It's actually a beautiful view, especially at night.
Piece of cake. Excellent advice. Alan, thank you so much for being here. And a huge thanks to LinkedIn for making today possible.
And now it's me, the host and editor of One Big Thing, Nyla Boodoo. Good evening, everyone. Oh, that was good. Oh, okay. I think everyone's paying more attention because we just ended the music there. Hi, I'm Nyla Boodoo. I'm host of our newly launched podcast, One Big Thing. And I'd like to welcome our next guest. Joining me, U.S. Department of Energy Deputy Secretary of Energy, David Turk. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Axios House. You got your mic.
Well, thanks, Nyla. Thanks for having me here.
Of
What a
course.
beautiful, you guys got
Beautiful
the best place in
view.
the COP here.
Yeah, thank you for leaving Expo City and the Blue Zone to be here
It's
with us.
much better here, I think.
It's a nice breeze, a little breezier. So we're talking about green jobs today, but I do want to get to that.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to start with some news out of the U.S. There was a leaked draft of the Treasury Department rules for the production tax credit for clean hydrogen, which I know is something that you have been working very deeply on. According to Bloomberg News, the industry is saying that if this leaked draft of the rules is correct, that these requirements put the nascent hydrogen industry at risk. So at issue is what kind of hydrogen is going to be allowed in this tax credit, and I just want to start by asking what's your response to that, from this strong response from the industry?
Yeah, so let me just take a bit of a step back. I hope your whole audience appreciates just how big of a deal these recent pieces of legislation are under President Biden's leadership, and what we're doing in the U.S., not just on clean hydrogen, but across the board, right? The tax incentives of which this hydrogen production tax credit is one have been estimated $369 billion. It could be even more than that, up to $1 trillion or even more than that, depending on industry uptake. Our own department has $100 billion of additional grant money, including $7 billion that we just put out for clean hydrogen hubs across the country. $400 billion of loan authority. We are working hand in hand with the Treasury Department under White House leadership on the hydrogen production tax credit. I've been involved personally in many of those meetings with John Podesta and counterparts at Treasury. The rigor with which we're approaching these tax credits, the hydrogen production tax credit's a big one. This is up to $3 per kilogram for the cleanest of hydrogen. That is a big incentive, and we're spending an awful lot of time getting industry feedback, getting other stakeholder feedback to do this right. So I'm not commenting.
Right. So, and not necessarily, I know it's Treasury, but what's at stake here to get this right?
So this is a big deal. $3 per kilogram is a very generous tax credit. Getting that part right with our $7 billion of hydrogen hubs. We've got an additional $1 billion for this creative demand side creation on hydrogen. Putting all these pieces, all these tools together and thinking through not only what's going to be useful next year and the year after, but these tax credits go for 10 years. And in the case of the hydrogen production tax credit, there's a tail that lasts even into 2040. So it is a big deal to get this right. That's why we're taking this so seriously. That's why all this analysis, all this feedback from industry. We try to run a very tight ship. So I'm incredibly disappointed that someone leaked this document. I can't comment on this document, but we're still working to deliberate and put the final package together.
And it sounds like obviously taking this feedback seriously.
We take the feedback incredibly seriously, and we try to approach this with some humility. We've got a lot of smart people at the Department of Energy, hydrogen experts who have literally been working in this industry for decades. But we have to be humble, and the clean energy revolution, the clean energy transition at scale and pace is going to need to be private sector led. The government can enable that. The government can get the rules right with these incentives, but we need that private sector feedback. We need that stakeholder feedback. We're also spending a lot of time with communities, including in our hydrogen hubs, to make sure we do this the right way in terms of environmental justice and to make sure that the jobs are there for the people that need them the most and we don't have harmful consequences of any of this infrastructure build out. So we take our environmental justice incredibly seriously as well in listening to those stakeholders in those communities.
I wanted to ask you about something. Yesterday, FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell was sitting in that seat chatting with me. And she mentioned, when I asked her sort of like what her biggest worries were, because I was thinking in the natural disaster world, her answer surprised me because she talked about cybersecurity. And she talked about cybersecurity threats and misinformation after natural disasters. She mentioned East Palestine and the Maui wildfires and nation-state actors that were actively spreading misinformation. I wanted to ask you about what particular concerns you have within the purview of DOE when it comes to national security, cybersecurity. I'm thinking particularly of our national labs, but just curious what your concerns are there.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time on the cybersecurity issue. For those who remember a few years ago, the hack of Colonial Pipeline, which disrupted an awful lot of our country. I spent a lot of time on that, and so I can certainly appreciate cybersecurity and the challenges that we've got, and we've got to remain incredibly vigilant. The other issue I'd put on the table in terms of something that keeps me up at night, literally keeps me up at night, is artificial intelligence. So AI.
Right, and there's a whole other layer of challenges involved with AI.
So we do a lot of AI work in the Department of Energy. In fact, 4 of the 10 world's fastest supercomputers are actually Department of Energy lab computers. So we know AI, and when I meet with our AI experts, they're excited about the potential, including to accelerate our clean energy transition, but they also get really worried that this means that less sophisticated actors out there can use AI with biological threats, with nuclear threats, and so we really have to keep our eye on the ball. This president, this administration released a sweeping executive order over 100 pages outlining different responsibilities for different departments to make sure that we do what we need to do to keep everybody safe from AI, working in a public-private way and working with other countries.
I want to make sure we talk about green jobs and ask you about what we're seeing in terms of the data about where these kind of jobs are. You all have been tracking this closely.
So we do track it closely. The latest numbers we have are from 2022, and there's some really good news stories in that. First of all, 40% of the energy jobs in the United States are now clean energy jobs. That's not where it was before. Clean energy jobs are actually growing larger than in the traditional energy space. And we've got some phenomenal growth. If you look at the EV supply chain in 2022, and I think the 2023 numbers will be even more, those jobs went up 27% just in 1 year. So we're seeing some explosive growth in clean jobs. The other good news nugget is over 50% of those new jobs in energy in 2022 were for women. And that's not where the energy sector is overall. Our percentages are not where they need to be, and it's good to see more jobs available for all Americans.
So how much of this, though, when we're thinking about the future workforce, we talk a lot about training, but I wanted to ask you also about geography. Like, do we have people in the right places?
So
When we're talking about America, obviously, first.
So we're going, just speaking in the energy space, right, which is where I'm focused on, especially the clean energy transition, which is my own expertise and specialty. We are going to have such a transformation in our country. I'm not sure, and we need to have such a transformation in our country. Speaking here at the climate conference, we've got to fundamentally transform our energy economy, which is where the bulk of our emissions come from. Not just electricity, where we're making some progress, but transportation, industry, buildings across the board. And we've got to get to net zero in just a short couple decade period of time. And so we're going to need to have a lot of jobs. We're going to need to be thinking ahead of the workforce piece of it. I had a chance to travel with the First Lady to Indiana to visit a community college. She's been such a champion on community college and making sure that we've got jobs that are not just college-educated jobs, but apprenticeships, union jobs. And so we're going to have a huge amount of new jobs, but we need to be intentional. We need to be purposeful. It's not just focusing on it at the high school or college level.
No, but I'm even talking about former fossil fuel workers. Like, research shows that they're not necessarily in the right place for these jobs. So how do we solve for that?
So there's a lot of exciting opportunities for folks who've been in the fossil fuel industry. One of the companies I'm most excited about, and one of the industries I'm most excited about, it's a nascent industry, is enhanced geothermal. And a lot of the people who are in the companies in geothermal were oil and gas workers and oil and gas experts, because it's drilling underground, it's using a lot of that same experience, a lot of that same engineering. So there's some real opportunities on that, but we need to face this head on. We need to prepare for the future that we're building and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to succeed in this new energy, this new clean energy economy.
Deputy Secretary, we're almost out of time. Just quickly wanted to ask you one last question about being here at COP28. What are you most excited about coming out of this conference? Knowing we're not to the end yet, but at this moment.
So it's sobering. I gotta be honest with you. This is the global stock take. This is the first time we're supposed to, in the COP context, take a step back and how we're doing. The numbers show that we're making some real progress, but we've got an awful lot more work to do, especially in implementation. It's one thing to put goals and targets. There's some new goals and targets here, tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency. That's phenomenal. But what I'm focused on day in and day out, and my Department of Energy colleagues, is implementing. Because of this historic legislation, because of this president, because of this Congress, we have so many more tools in our tool belt to actually implement and to actually achieve our targets. Before this administration came in, we had estimates of where our emissions would be. Now with this historic legislation, all that we're doing, our emissions reductions are going to be double what they were previously, just from the work and the legislation of the past couple years. Now, there's more we need to do, absolutely. But I think we all need to be asking ourselves tough questions and asking each other tough questions, the kind of questions that Vice President Gore is asking. On the oil and gas sector in particular, I think it's great to focus on methane emissions. We've had some important announcements on that. But we also need to have a real, honest, candid conversation on so-called Scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions, that's the emissions that are burned when there's gas in a car or natural gas in a power plant. Those Scope 3 emissions are 10 times the amount of the emissions in Scope 1 and Scope 2 for most oil and gas companies. So we absolutely need to take those Scope 3 emissions head on.
Thank you so much for being with us, DOE Deputy Secretary David Turk.
Thanks, Nyla. Thanks, everybody.
Welcoming back to the stage, Andrew Friedman.
Thank you to those of you sticking around, sticking close to the stage. We have somebody who I was really excited to get for this particular conversation, in part because she's been on so many Zoom calls that I've been a part of and hadn't actually met her. So please welcome to the stage Joyce Kimutai from the Kenyan Meteorological Service. You have quite the fans in that section.
Thank you, I'm pleased.
To inform people who may not know about kind of a branch of science, of climate science and meteorology, Joyce is one of the people that's sort of one of these like CSI detectives when it comes to extreme weather events and extreme climate events. What do you want people to know about the capabilities that we now have and that we're continuing to develop at making connections between extreme events that happen, that make news all over the world, and human-caused climate change?
Thank you so much, and really thank you so much for having me here today. It's quite a pleasure to speak to all these important people and to really engage with you about the kind of work that I do. So I'm a climate scientist. I study attribution science. So it's a field of science that is relatively new, but really fast evolving. And what this field does is it tries to analyze extreme events, so extreme weather and climate events, and really assess how much or to what extent is climate change modifying these extremes. So for over the past like 20 years, this field has really evolved. The methodologies of understanding extreme weather and trying to see to what extent anthropogenic climate change, so the influence of human activities on the climate system, how these are modifying these extremes is what we do. And why we do this is we really want to communicate and raise awareness of what is happening, why we see the changes in the system, what extremes are happening, and how people can actually do or address the impacts that are associated with these extremes.
So within the scientific field, I feel like this is a growing area for, meteorologists to go into, for climate scientists to look to as a possible career path. It's sort of like, if you think of green jobs overall, there's sort of a jobs program within the scientific community. I feel like a lot of people are kind of interested and inspired by this work. Have you seen kind of a gravitational pull of other scientists who maybe would have gone into another area or another field, but are heading into attribution?
Yeah, I mean, really, I've seen many scientists being very interested in this field. I remember when it started, it was really difficult for many scientists to see or to understand how we could, for example, attribute a specific extreme event to climate change. But over time, with improvement in the methods, there's really been the gravitation towards coming to this field because of the importance that this field has, actually. Like when we are able, especially I'm part of an initiative called World Weather Attribution, where we respond rapidly to extreme events to understand and communicate. It's been very fascinating, even interacting with scientists and getting them to ask me a lot of questions about how we do this, how exciting we actually get to do it very quickly. We get to get the messages out as quickly as possible when it's still fresh in people's minds, because that is very important. We want to, when say a flood is happening or a drought is happening or a heat wave is happening, we want to be at the forefront to explaining how actually climate change has influenced that particular event. So be it an heat wave, we want to say the mortalities that have been experienced, or the heat strokes, for example, that have been experienced, to link and say, actually, it's the warming of the system that is causing whatever we're seeing at the particular time.
And there was just a study out, I think it was WWA that did it, about the country where you work and floods that occurred in Kenya and other areas, finding they were made at least 100 times more likely. And I've been doing this for the past couple of days, so that's the only conclusion I saw was the headline, which I hate doing. But how would you say like this type of work makes an impact with people? How have you seen it changing minds or pushing the conversation forward on the need to reduce fossil fuel emissions?
So I'll tell you a very interesting thing that really stood up for me, especially during this COP. My president actually used the study that I led myself to build and defend a case at COP28. So in the presidential address, thank you so much. So in the presidential address, he actually talked about the drought that I led, and I was trying to disentangle the many sort of the drivers that was driving this, and I could quantify the role of climate change in that. And most importantly was that after that long drought, it actually caused a lot of impacts. There was a lot of loss of harvests, livestock for people. I mean, there was really a lot of impacts, devastating impacts in all of Africa from that drought. But what followed immediately after that drought is the extreme rainfall that we're seeing now. So these extreme events, these shifts in extreme events, drastic and rapid shifts in extreme events is really lowering the capacity of the people. So the people, the communities, the systems in that region are continually being impacted by extreme events. And not just extreme events that are linked to the warming of the planet.
And as a scientist, I'm not asking you to go and attack the COP president here. But as a scientist, I mean, it would be nice if you did. But as a scientist, when you're seeing the COP president having to go on a press conference to say, I follow science and I understand the science, what is the skepticism or kind of, what is your reaction from the scientific community, from your brain, when you're seeing this discussion about, you know, the 1.5 degree goal, when you know what this means in your country and your president has, you know, pushed for it? To me, it's just a bad sign about your COP when the president, more than a week into it, has to say, I believe scientists and I follow science, because usually that's a clue that they don't. Just a clue. But I'm curious from the scientific perspective. I think the IPCC chair did a very good job at that press conference. But science is supposed to inform the decision making at these COPs and elsewhere, not make the decisions for them, but lay out the options. And do you think science is being used properly and understood properly in these talks?
I mean, honestly speaking, I wish when they say they understood the science, they meant it. Because sometimes I see that for the 27 COP conferences that we've had, and we're doing our 28th now, I mean, to me, really, there's been more talk than action. And I really wish people understood the science. And I'm saying this as a scientist because I look at the data myself. This is my day-to-day job. From 8 to 5, I look at the data, analyze, and I've been seeing, being in this field, I see extreme events increasing, really hurting people. People are suffering from the impacts of these extremes. 2023 is going to be the hottest year on record. Greenhouse gas concentrations are on the highest. I mean, what does that say? It says that we're not doing, it's just talk. We're not walking the talk, right? We're just talking, we're not doing anything. So, I mean, really, for me, I think it's just time that we phase out fossil fuels. I mean, that is an honest opinion as a scientist. It might not be politically correct, but I don't think we need political correctness now because people are really suffering. So, I mean, phasing down has been the term that has been used for the longest time. I don't think it's been offering any solutions, and we've seen that. So I think phasing out is what we need.
And that voice has been coming from multiple members of the WWA collaboration and other attribution groups around the world. Just lastly, briefly, I guess I want to ask you, like in a 30-second mode, like where you see the attribution field going next, or where do you wish it could go, given advances in AI technologies and what a lot of scientists, beyond your group are doing and that you suddenly discover and are really, really curious about. Where do you want it to be going?
Yeah, I mean, what I want the science to go is, first of all, I mean, the most important thing, before we advance the science, I want the science to be useful, to be understood, for people to see why we're doing the science. I think that's very important. I think for us as scientists to sit and advance methodologies that are not, I mean, the science itself is not helping, is not informing policy, wouldn't be very useful. It might be interesting as a scientist, but I think I really, really hope that as we go forward, as we continue to respond to extreme events, to communicate them on time, to explain, to raise awareness, I hope people can use that information. But when you talk about AI, I mean, what I think the field can do and what we can do more is we want to incorporate other like data sources like socioeconomic data, vulnerability exposure, because what really happens is when an extreme event occurs, we call it the hazard, when it occurs, what modulates sort of the impacts, I mean, what causes the disasters is actually what is on the ground. So what is the state of things on where the hazard is. So the most important thing is to see how exposed and vulnerable are the people, and that allowed informs sort of the adaptation and also the loss and damage debate as well. Like we really need to know like what are these losses, what are the damages, what are the places that are experiencing this. So I, as a scientist, I've been as well really looking at how the science can inform policy processes like loss and damage debate.
Well, congratulations on making it into a presidential speech. That's pretty cool. It's better than, another paper, maybe, in the scientific literature. Please, thank you for coming. Thank you for speaking. Everybody, please hang around, network, and we have more programming here tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.